Jinsey grew, he was admitted to a university off-world back on Earth, but couldn't afford to go. Instead, he studied at the Technical College in the colony there in Vindagu. He studied computers, learning some solid programming skills, and on the side improved on the hacking his brother had taught him. He might have gone into computers if he hadn't become interested in piloting. Henry, whose grades weren't quite as good but whose parents had more money, did go off-world, and Jinsey figured that was the last of him, that he probably wouldn't hear from him again. But in a year, Henry had flunked out and was back on Vindagu at the Technical College as well. "I'm the family failure," he claimed to Jinsey. "They can hardly stand to look at me," which made Jinsey wonder if he was at fault for whatever had gone wrong with Henry. Perhaps he had ruined him by distracting him, giving him hints of a different, stranger life. Jinsey never went back to the house, but he still walked sometimes through the Marina Valley compound, hoping to catch a glimpse of his brother, gaining some reassurance from the family grimness of the streets. Then one day that was gone, too, carried away in a public works effort to clean up the compound. For a few days the streets stayed clean, the smell of disinfectant replacing the stench of trash, but quickly they began to revert to what they were before. Several times while walking through one part of the city or another, Jinsey thought he caught a glimpse of his brother, hair-crazed and overgrown, shambling, but he rarely managed to catch up with these appropriations, and the few times he did, they turned out not to be his brother after all. And so 3 or 4 years went by with Jinsey moving forward with his life. At first he thought often of Istvan, but as time went on he thought of him less and less. He could go for days without thinking of him at all. He managed to finish his associate's degree in flight and cargo manipulation, and would have gone on to complete his bachelor's if the planetary government hadn't cut school funding. When that happened, he moved out of his foster's family home, took a small apartment near Vindagu's space hub, and began to work. He was a picker, working every time a ship bearing supplies came in. His job was to help crew a surface-to-atmosphere ship that would meet the hug cargo ships that came into orbit, transferring a fraction of the load from one ship to the other, over and over again until the cargo was on the surface. It was a simple job, but he didn't mind it. They were busy building an orbital docking station, and he wondered if this wouldn't eventually make his job obsolete. For a while Henry did the job as well, but the moments of near weightlessness proved too much for him. He went back into training on his family's money, preparing for first one surface-based job and then another. Picking either was very busy or very slack, never simply steady. He was either working 16-hour shifts or lying idle in his apartment scrolling through something on the vid screen. Was it the life he had dreamed of? No, but it was better than any life he probably would have had if he'd ended up staying in the Marina Valley compound. He met a woman a little shorter than him and slightly plump and somewhat neurotic. He saw her for a while and then broke it off. Then he met another long-legged and a little taller than him, generous and kind, whom he liked much better, but he managed to sabotage the relationship despite that. He was leery of getting involved, leery of establishing new ties, remembering the hell that had been his family growing up. He wondered if he should see someone, a psychiatrist, a specialist. Maybe they could help him, but he didn't know who to see or where to start looking. It could have gone a long time, maybe even for a while life, but it didn't for one simple reason. The reason was Istvan. Nearly 4 years after his brother had suddenly disappeared, Jinsey was on a long pick, 36 hours solid, clearing out a freighter on overtime. He would catch a little sleep here and there on the trip up and down, but not enough not to be exhausted by the time the pick was finally over. When he went home, he found his apartment unlocked. Weird, he thought, but shook it off, figured he'd been called away on the pick on short enough notice that he'd simply made a mistake and forgotten to lock the door inside. Nothing seemed to be out of place or missing either in the living room or the bedroom. But when he went into the bathroom, turned on the light, shucked off his clothes, and pulled back the shower curtain to climb in, there was Istvan. "Hello, brother," Istvan said, and offered his flat, dead smile. At first, Jinsey thought he was much more tired than he'd realized that he was hallucinating. But no, after screaming and stumbling back into the wall, he found Istvan reaching out and steadying him, stepping out of the tube, undeniably real. "What are you doing here?" Jinsey asked, hurt, still thudding. "I came to see you," claimed Istvan. He had cut his hair short in a crew cut and was clean shaven. His right cheek was marred by an angry red scar, puffing and relatively fresh. Jinsey could feel something strange about one of the hands steadying him, but it was only when Istvan let go that he realized it was missing 2 fingers. "How did you find me?" asked Jinsey. "I always knew where you were," said Istvan. "I've been watching over you." "Watching over me," Jinsey thought, and shivered. He pushed Istvan gently away and slipped back into his clothes. "Why were you hiding in the bathroom?" he asked once they were in the living room. "How did I know it was you?" Istvan asked. "It could have been someone else. It could have been them." Jinsey nodded. He wasn't sure what to say or what to do. Did he really want to see his brother at all? But already the weird mixture of guilt and affection that he thought he'd managed to eradicate years ago was beginning to well up within him. The unhealthy bond with his brother was already starting to form again. "You can't stay here," he managed to say. "I don't want to stay here," Istvan said. "I have a purpose now." "What do you mean, a purpose?" Istvan smiled and shook his head. "It's my purpose, not yours," he said. "It's for me to know." Jinsey ran his fingers through his hair. "Why are you here?" he asked. "I wanted to see you again," said Istvan, "one more time before fulfilling my purpose." "What's that supposed to mean, fulfilling my purpose? What are you on about?" But Istvan just smiled flatly again. "You look well," said Jinsey. "You look tired," claimed Istvan. "I am tired," said Jinsey. "I'm exhausted." He tried again. "What do you mean by your purpose?" "They told me not to tell." "Who told you?" "They." "Who's they?" Suddenly Istvan giggled. He pressed his hand over his mouth to stop himself, but couldn't help giggling through it. "What's wrong, Estevan?" Jinsey asked, trying to keep his voice as calm as he possibly could. Estevan giggled again, then closed his eyes. He sat there on the couch, trying to breathe slowly until finally the giggles stopped entirely. Then he slowly moved his hand away from opening his eyes. "Sir," he said, "see, everything is all right. There is nothing wrong with me." "I don't know what you're planning," said Jinsey, "but whatever it is, don't do it." "There is nothing wrong with me," said Estevan again, but this time it sounded more like a question. "Estevan," Jinsey said, but Estevan was already standing. "I have to go," he said. "I just wanted to see you first." "Before your purpose," said Jinsey. "Before my purpose," he said, and smiled. He walked almost drunkenly to the door, turning around just as he got there. "I'll be on the vid tomorrow," he said. "All the vids. Watch for me. I'll be famous." And then he was gone. "He's crazy," thought Jinsey, certifiable. Just like Mother, his brother had been going on about some imagined encounter he had, some delusion of glory and fame that he'd invented for himself, which would amount to nothing. His brother had re-entered his life for a brief, somewhat painful moment, and now he was gone again. Maybe for good this time. "I should be thankful he's gone," Jinsey told himself. "He's nothing but trouble." But he wasn't thankful, couldn't feel thankful. Instead, despite being exhausted, he found himself having difficulty sleeping. What had his brother been talking about? His purpose? What if it didn't mean something? Did mean something. He turned over and tried to ignore the thoughts. He closed his eyes and lay there watching a little burst of imagined light flicker over his eyelids. He tried all the tricks he could think of to coax himself to sleep, counting sheep, even though he had never seen an actual sheep, thinking through a math problem mentally, repeating to himself the same arithmetic phrase over and over again, trying to imagine the weight of his body growing heavier and heavier and falling asleep limb by limb. But nothing worked. There, beneath the exhaustion he was feeling like an inhuman, baleful eye, was his worry about his brother staring at him, staring into him, keeping him from asleep. He kept trying to fall asleep until finally he felt like he was going mad. Then he got up, vidded. "Henry, do you know what time it is?" Henry asked, his face and hair scruffy through the vid. "All too well," said Jinsey. "I couldn't sleep." "So you thought you'd wake me up and make it so neither of us could sleep?" He yawned. "Estevan was here." "What?" said Henry. "Really? You mean you dreamed about him?" Jinsey shook his head. "He was really here in the flesh." "I thought by this time he was probably dead," said Henry. "What did he want?" "He wanted to see me one last time." "One last time? Before what?" Jinsey explained the little he knew. "He's crazy, he's right." "He's crazy, right?" he asked once he was finished. "Maybe," said Henry slowly. "I don't know. Maybe he's planning to do something." "What?" Henry shrugged. "I don't know," he said. "Something drastic, maybe." "Like what?" "What's he capable of?" asked Henry. "I know you love him and that he's your brother, but you remember how he was when we first found him. He might have killed us if he's in the right mood or the wrong one. I think he's capable of anything." A bomb, maybe? A bomb, said Jinsey. You've got to be kidding. It could break one of the domes, put everyone at risk. Doesn't have to be a bomb, said Henry. Anything happening tomorrow? Like what? A speech, a rally, some sort of protest march, a meeting of two officials, something along those lines. I don't know, said Jinsey. I've been picking. I haven't been following the vids. Have you noticed anything? Henry shook his head. I don't think so. If there is, maybe he's planning to disrupt it. He claimed he was going to be on the vids. That's what he said. Henry shrugged. Look through the vid notices. See what's happening tomorrow. We can try to figure it out. Stake a place out if it sounds right. Otherwise, we just wait, watch the vids for something that seems likely, and then if we find it, try to make it there before he does. Jinsey cut the link and tried to sleep again without success. He lay there staring up into the dark until slowly the room began to brighten. Then he got up and began scrolling through vid notices. A school was being opened, someone from the colonial authority coming to cut the ribbon. There was a press conference on the steps of the municipal hall run by a politician named Tim Fisher about a methane leak in one of the outer domes and to what degree, if any, the government was responsible. A political rally for the opposition candidate David Verne Nagel held not far from the municipal hall. An ambassador from EarthGov named Jedro Berry landing at the spaceport. There were other things mentioned, but they seemed less likely. The revamping of a new low-income housing project, the demolition of a now deserted microdome, etc. If it was anything, it was probably one of those four events, but which one? Henry would help him, but that still meant they could only cover two: school ribbon cutting, press conference, politician rally, ambassador. Any of them might be what he was looking for, a place for Istvan to be visible, to be seen on vid while he did whatever he planned to do. Was he likely to be violent, crazy? Yes, Jinsey had to admit either of those things were possible, even likely. Would he try to hurt someone, kill someone? Would he try to kill himself? All possible. But it was equally possible that his purpose, whatever he meant by that, might be something else entirely, something relatively benign. Maybe he would throw a pie at the ambassador, or maybe he would take his pants down at the press conference and moon the crowd. He tried to tell himself that Istvan was doubtless capable of those sorts of things too. Though Jinsey knew he was fooling himself, that violence was most likely. What about? Suddenly worried, Jinsey, still exhausted, his eyes throbbing in his sockets, a migraine just beginning to create an aura in front of one eye that he knew would travel across his vision until it filled both eyes and then dissolved into pain. What if Istvan, in saying he was on the vid, was not referring to some event or occurrence that he was going to hijack, but to the fact that whatever he did, it would be featured on the news after the fact, that he would be made famous by having fulfilled his purpose? What if it hasn't, that he was going to borrow the celebrity of an event, but that he was going to make his own fame by doing something rash? If that was his plan, he could do that anywhere. If that was the case, there was no way to find until it was done, until it was too late. The next 6 hours were the worst Jinsey had ever lived, the most anxious, the most exhausted. Until close to the time of the event themselves, there was nothing he could do. He just had to wait, all the while trying to figure which might be the most likely place to find his brother, trying to ignore the fact that his brother might not be at any of the events he keyed on. He kept imagining Estevan strapping himself into a jacket with sticks of explosives sewn on the inside of it, or his brother suddenly appearing out of the crowd, running toward the steps of the platform, or the security guards brandishing a knife. He was worried both that his brother would kill someone and that trying to do something foolhardy, his brother would be killed. He didn't know for certain which was more likely. In the middle of the morning, Henry showed up together. They talked things through. "Does he care about politics?" asked Henry. "He didn't used to," said Jinsey. "Now who can say? I haven't seen him in years." "His purpose," he said. "Was there a way he said it? A particular way he phrased it? Did he sound political to you? Religious?" Jinsey shook his head. "It didn't sound like anything. It just confused me." "Let's try to think," said Henry. "There are only two of us. We can only cover two things. We have to narrow it down," said Jinsey. Nodded. "Or we could call the police," said Henry. "Tell them there's been a threat on the two that we can't cover. That might make things worse." "For who? For Estevan?" "Certainly it won't make things worse for whoever he might hurt." Jinsey shook his head. "No," he said. "He'd see it as a betrayal. I can't do it." "You may have to do it," said Henry. "You don't want anybody's death on your conscience. It could lead to his death, to Estevan's. I don't want his death on my consciousness either. I don't want to do it." Henry just looked at him with a steady eye. "Only at last resort," Jinsey finally said. "All right," said Henry, and sighed. "Only as a last resort. Political rally seems likely," said Henry. "How about that?" "I don't know," said Jinsey. "I'd think so, but since it's for the opposition candidate, I'm not so sure. He always supported the underdog. But maybe he's changed." "So possible, but maybe not likely." "What about the school ceremony? Does he have anything against education?" "He didn't want me to join my foster family," said Jinsey. "School might be tied into that for him, something that he feels separated us." "But it's a new school opening," said Henry, "not a school that you went to. I know his mind is broken, but as a symbolic gesture it doesn't amount to much." "His mind is broken," thought Jinsey, and then thought, "Yes, Henry, right. Someone on the colonial authority is cutting the ribbon," continued Henry. "Is it anybody he knows?" "Who is it?" They looked at the vid notice. "It doesn't say," said Jinsey. "No way to tell without going. Even Then we probably won't know, said Henry. Who knows what he's been up to or who he's met over the last several years. Still not likely. What about the ambassador from EarthGov? What's his name? He scrolled through the vid until he found it. Jeddo Barry. Name ring a bell? Jinsey shook his head. All right, said Henry. That's okay. Doesn't mean anything. He's a representative of EarthGov authority. That might be enough, he sighed. Basically, nobody seems all that likely. Nobody is jumping to the top. They sat across from one another in silence until finally Jinsey said, So what do we do? Do we draw straws? Jinsey felt like he was going mad, his mind straining to see a connection that either wasn't visible or simply wasn't there. He felt like Istvan, always searching for a pattern, trying to see something that nobody else could see. How would Istvan think? He wondered, his head throbbing. He tried to put himself in the place of his brother, tried to remember the erratic way he had responded to those situations that had seemed clear and straightforward to Jinsey, but they were all moments from childhood, and even thinking back on them, he could neither understand them nor extrapolate them into something relevant to the present situation. He had long understood that something was seriously wrong with the way Istvan viewed the world, as if he were seeing everything through a different lens than everyone else, a dark and smoky lens that distorted everything and made it false. But how could Jinsey, more or less normal, simulate that way of seeing the world? Solemnly, Henry took 4 scraps of paper and wrote a word on each one. Rally, press, school, port. Then he folded each into a small square and jumbled them in one hand. Do you want to choose first, or shall I? He asked. Jinsey, reaching out, took a piece of paper from Henry's hand. Open it, Henry said. You go first, said Jinsey. Henry closed his eyes, felt around among the pieces of paper. Choose one. Together they opened them. School, said Henry. Port, said Jinsey. Henry reached out and placed his hand on Jinsey's shoulder. Good luck, he said, and they both left.